Hi, welcome to Leaving Babylon. I'm Madeline, and I appreciate you being here today. Today we have quite a lot to go through, so I'm going to pretty much jump into it. This episode is called Masquerade in the Bastille, so we're going to be doing the part 4 of the Loosing of Satan series. This one is going to cover an aspect of the Bastille that had kind of been annoying me because there's a lot of mystery that surrounds the Bastille, and some of the strange yet very curious paths that we can go down from there. And so just going back to kind of the time that surrounds the French Revolution, some of the things that were going on, but also obviously the loosing of Satan and tracing down some of the evidence of that. And so I hope this helps us all see through some of the deceptions and lies. 2 Corinthians tells us in chapter 11, verse 14, "And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light." And isn't that true? As we go down here, we actually see that false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Okay, so I think Paul really is driving home the fact that we need to be vigilant. We need to understand that often our eyes deceive us. What we think we see or what we think we hear is very possibly a deception if it's something that we're being emotionally we're kind of emotionally reacting to, and that's kind of the big trick, to get us to consent, if you will, to an idea, a philosophy, an image that might not actually be telling us what we initially think, because that's what we've been told. So I'm going to move also to Revelation chapter 20. And we're just going to read about Satan, and he was cast. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season. And so when we go down a little further, it says, "And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea." So we know that many of us that are here now, we know that we are in Satan's little season. This is the time that is after the millennial reign, and we'll see more evidence of that. I've covered some of that already in previous videos, so please go back. This is part 4, so if you want to catch up and find out where we're at right now, we can you'll maybe understand this a little more. Want to just highlight throughout this video particularly the art of deception and how that's brought to us in many forms. That might be through story form, it might be through, I guess, prior to the movies, prior to magazines and news and things like that, there would have been books and probably newspapers, so people would have been, or even just on the grapevine, hearing things on the grapevine. And a lot of that is just a form of coercion. It really is an art. Deception is an art. Just like anything else, you might talk about political science, you might talk about medical science, you might talk about all of these learnings. Deception is, I would say, the serpent tongue that is kind of fed into everything, into all of those learnings, into all of those communications. Every day we have to really be aware that, what are we looking at here? What are we hearing? What are we seeing? Is it true? Is it verifiable? Or is it just something that I want to be true? This article here on the National Library of Medicine website talks specifically to the point about coercion, consent, and how these narratives are weaved throughout as they gain public consent or a person's consent, even through deception. So here we see it can be permissible to undermine the validity of subjects' consent through deception, and it can be permissible to enroll subjects into the research without any consent at all. And so this article here is just dissecting that a little bit. And without reading the whole thing, it poses these problems about, if something's for the collective good. And we read about that a little bit in the part 2, where we talk about how law started to be formed at these kind of liberty movements. So it wasn't actually about your individual liberty. If your individual liberty was at odds with the collective, then you would actually be the one who would have to conform. And so these are the double speaks of liberty that we come into contact with in our lives. And it forms a huge part of that. The liberty narrative is that we are exposed to coercion, deception, whether that be visually or through people that we trust, whether they be doctors or whether they be politicians or teachers, and these doublespeak narratives often are just passed on. They might not be the person themselves that is intending to deceive, but they might be deceived. So they're passing on, or they might be coerced into this. Which I think is the case for a lot of the secret societies that are surrounding us now, is that these people often, maybe not all, but they may not even be involved, fully aware of what they're involved in. And yet they are leading our society down this path. So they're deceived, they're deceiving others, and this deception is passed along through the narrative, through the official narrative. And I think just to keep that in mind. I also want to talk about catch-22 logic. So when we're talking about deceptions and, these kind of social consents that we buy into because we trust people. And I don't want to make a paranoia situation about this, but this is what this video is about, is how do we perceive deception? So we have other things like the paradox of catch-22, where either choice is kind of a trap, or it's the end is actually always coming to the same point. So it doesn't matter if you go left or right. Those two paths will always take you to the destination that the people who built the path want you to get to. And maybe we see this in the form of mazes, where they would create a maze out of hedges, like a hedge maze, and then you would find your way through, but they had already planned it out. It was mapped out ahead of time. So your choices aren't always a natural choice, and the way that we perceive things are often primed already through imagery and through messaging that has come to us by way of our teachers, by way of our, other people. And so even music and all of the media that we are bombarded with in this age of deception. And something that we have to also realize is that the excuse of deception doesn't remove our liability. So the fact that Eve was actually deceived by the serpent is not an excuse. And that's just something that I think I covered in the Terms of the Kingdom video, was that just because you're deceived doesn't mean that you're not going to pay the consequences. And that is the whole purpose of deception. That is what Satan is doing to this world. The deception, the decisions that come out of deception, whether they be by individual consent or broad social consent, do not remove the punishment that will happen to you. Okay. And so we just see this in that sort of terms and conditions example, where I might sign up for a new house, a new car, and then I have to sign all of these papers. Of course, I trust the people who've written them, that they have legal protections in place for the buyer and things like that. Or I might sign up for an online service and I just tick, yes, I consent. However, the terms in there, I have now signed my name to. And so once I partake, once I consent to something, I am liable for the terms. Okay, so this is why deception is the hugest tool of the enemy, because if they can deceive you, if they can coerce you, if they can scare you into a decision that is a deceptive, not what you think it is. So this is where doublespeak comes in. And we're going to talk about masks, and we're going to talk about how the enemy is masked, as we read in the first verse there in 2 Corinthians 11:14, how he masquerades. Some of the versions use masquerade, and I like that word actually, because and the original says transformed. So when we use a masquerade, we transform into something else, and we are not recognizable as the thing that we truly are. And this is the whole key of deception. And so we have to be vigilant. We have to be aware that in the prowling around, in the deceiving, in the building of these false stories, Satan is behind it, hidden, to coerce us, to deceive us, okay? And this can't be more important for us to understand. So as we talk about the Bastille, as we go through the story, I want to highlight to you that the Bastille actually existed during what I would call the millennial reign. During the medieval period, it was built. And from what I can gather, it was a prison used by the nobility, who when we're going by the millennial reign, the understanding of the millennial reign, the nobility would have had places like this to put people that were being punished. And we know that Jesus ruled with a rod of iron. That's a scriptural reference. And I don't doubt that people were punished for not obeying the laws of God. And so I just want to cover this a little bit, this article here. He makes a very good point that what they would call Bastille Day. So the Bastille was a prison, as we've mentioned, and I think it was July 14th. It was stormed, what they say. They actually call it an insurrection, but it was, they call it the storming of the Bastille, and that was July 14th, 1789. So we're talking about a period that is after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, but the French Revolution took off after that. So this is all part and parcel. Earlier that year is when the official start date of the French Revolution. It was in May. And so the storming of the Bastille was kind of this building, and it was the building of the fervor of the revolution. And so we're just going to look at that a little bit. I think this guy gets a lot right. He's not a Christian, but he talks about how the Bastille was kind of this history-making moment, he says here, and it was kind of a myth, actually, because he talks about how the French Revolution was actually based on heresy. And the heresy that the Christian church had identified of the revolution itself was that they put this kind of human perfection, that you could perfect the human through education. And that was the goal of the sort of like underlying sentiments, that the church was evil and it was opposed to this, because the church obviously spoke that from the scripture that we are sinful and that we need Jesus to reconcile us to God, and in the future, when we are made righteous, we will be perfect, like He is perfect. But for this time, so the humanist movement and the philosophical movements that predated the revolutions were building people up to this rejection of the teachings of Scripture, and they really, in the end, I mean, they just went to war with the church. And that's what the revolutions were really all about. That's what the French Revolution was about. And if you look back to part 1 and part 2, it goes through how these were very high-level occult philosophies, and had been born out of that post-millennial reign movement of philosophy, enlightenment, science, and all of these things. So when they actually stormed the Bastille, it turns out there was only 7 prisoners in there, which I found that really strange. So it seemed to be more of a kind of a show of something. The Bastille represented to them the old ancient regime, which was the nobility, which was the feudal system of the medieval era. And this sort of act of storming the Bastille and taking it was called an insurrection, and it was actually this it was almost like a play, you know, like they're doing this thing to show that they're taking over, and so that the citizens are now going to be the ones in charge. And that humanist movement is woven all throughout the stories of the French Revolution. And so they abolished feudalism, and they made the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen their cornerstone of the new democracy. And so this all just kind of was part of the visual representation that would get passed around in stories, and it would become the defining moment for the French as their Day of Liberty. And that kind of, you know, without a big event like that, how are you going to put your stake in the sand? This is our moment now. And so I think a little bit of the story of the Bastille, it's a little bit weird because there's like nobody in there. And so like, what do they really do? But they actually, they use that as their turning point officially, and they celebrate July 14th as their Bastille Day, almost exactly like Independence Day. And I just think the way that this author on this article writes this, he outlines very clearly that the misconceptions or the assumptions of the movement of humanism and this heresy was that they're actually not true. And here he goes into a little bit more detail. So it says, we are all equal brothers. And part of the, so the actual motto of the revolution, if you translate that from French, it's liberty, fraternity, equality, or death. And he calls it a myth. And I believe that as well. I think it was built on lies to coerce. Okay, so these are all wonderful words, but what does it really mean? And essentially, the word égalité is recognized as the equality movement. The liberty or freedom and brotherhood of man is the window dressing that creates warm, fuzzy feelings, that politicize words. And Christianity itself would agree with liberty and brotherhood, but more under the expression of love thy neighbor. So they've taken the same sentiments, but they have actually corrupted them. And here he says there is no equality, there is no progress, and he's talking about heaven. Basically under the law, there's no equality to be found. And so he just talks about this struggle between the understanding of liberty in the church, because one of the big struggles was that people felt, and this could be the rod of iron effect, but the people had felt that the church, especially the Roman Catholic Church, had become like a bludgeon, And they did feel, I guess, in some ways as if they had been put in chains. They had been terrorized and traumatized by the church. But on the other hand, the church had become very corrupt, which we can see through Martin Luther, the Reformation, is that the Roman Catholic Church had become very corrupt. And so there was this corruption of the church as it had been coming out of the millennial reign. And then you had the people reacting to this corruption, this like strong hand on their lives. And, you know, when it became corrupt, I do believe there were people taking advantage of the money of the church, you know, the positions of power. And I don't doubt that a lot of that was actually going on. But what happened was the revolutions weaponized that, and really, we'll see later, was written about as decapitating God. So that's just an expression that was used during that time. And, you know, we see these kinds of revolutionary activities, these visual moments happening in current day as well. And it's almost like a playbook, the revolutionary playbook. How do we get people all excited to be the fighting for liberty, this kind of idea of we're the liberty people, you guys are now the bad guys, and we're gonna fight back against you. So you put on displays, don't you? And you kind of match it with a more modern appearance of, you know, this is our Bastille moment, if you will. So we have France, who celebrate Bastille Day, 14th of July. Look at all this red, white, and blue, you see? And then you have the 4th of July, which is red, white, and blue. And even in England, you have the Union Jacks, red, white, and blue, and many national celebrations that occur under that same colored banner. So allegedly one of the prisoners in the Bastille, and this is where I'm going with this, is the Man in the Iron Mask, which we'll all recognize probably from this movie or others. There have been a few movies made about this. And one of the takes that became quite popular was that at the birth of the prince, so that would have been, I can't remember what prince it was now, but the Prince of France, his mother actually gave birth to a twin. And so as there could only be one inheritor of the throne, it was problematic. And so the common understanding is that this second, the twin, was taken away, raised separately, and then eventually was raised to cover his face because he was a twin, and he lived in this iron mask. And then we see Leonardo DiCaprio portraying this sad story. However, it's not quite as clear as that, and again, we're still aiming towards the loosing of Satan theory here. So there's a lot of mystery around this story. There's a number of people that it could have been, and there's a number of people that they want you to believe it was, and all of this. So this article here talks a lot about the various people that were involved, and that this essentially throughout this breakdown, but there have been a lot of people that have worked on this over the years to try and nail down what are the theories, who are the potential people, and why were they being held in this mask. Okay, so what comes out of it is that, and I'll just summarize a little bit before I read a little bit here, but it turns out that the Iron Mask theory developed because it was, this was like a secret prisoner and they wanted to keep them covered. But it turns out that witness accounts actually say it was a velvet mask. So it wasn't actually an iron mask in the original stories. But it kind of started off that this prisoner, so that there's a number of stories we'll just go through really quickly, that he was dangerous. He never removed his mask. that he had to be guarded by all times, and he couldn't speak to anybody. And Voltaire is a character in history who is a philosopher. He actually really hated the church, and I shouldn't say he hated the church, but he sought to redefine God and religion, doing away with the old ideas of the millennial reign and bringing in new philosophical ideas. And so he spent some time in the Bastille, which is, again, it's just very curious that why he went there. Apparently he was imprisoned there for some of his statements against God or the church, and so he was imprisoned there, allegedly. So among those to take up the rumor and add to it was Voltaire, who in 1738 began to claim that he had some knowledge of the prisoner, and that during visits to the Bastille he had spoken at length with his captors. Voltaire's version is that the prisoner had been made to wear a mask forged of iron, so this kind of came through Voltaire, for the intriguing reason that he looked so astonishingly similar to the king. And this builds on this twin theory, and that he was the queen. And this tale was immortalized by Alexander Dumas, who also wrote many other stories. I think he wrote the Three Musketeers story of D'Artagnan and all that. So, but before he made popular the fiction, contemporary documents had begun to surface, and efforts were made to uncover the truth behind this legend. The prisoner's mask was not made of iron at all, and indeed would eventually be able to match a name to this figure, but surprisingly, this would not clear up the mystery surrounding him. The first clues as to the identity of the man behind the mask came in 1769, when a Jesuit who had formerly, so this is where I start questioning the whole story, who had formerly served as the chaplain at the Bastille, turned up the journal of the former second in command at the Bastille. An entry said for September 18th, 1698, spoke of the arrival of this. I can't pronounce that in French, but basically it was the warden who is called Saint Mars. And I will get to Saint Mars, his name, because right now I'm holding this whole story under question marks. An entry in said journal, so he was the new governor of the Bastille, and of an old masked prisoner he had brought with him. And it says here that he was always masked with black velvet, and that he had been buried under the name Martial. Thus, the detail of the iron mask was among the first fictions dispelled by primary source material. So right there at the start, he's just saying, yeah, the iron mask probably wasn't real. It was probably a velvet or black mask. So it doesn't sound as severe as when you first hear the story of the man in the iron mask and he lived in this iron mask all his life. It starts to sound a little bit more like, well, was it voluntary? Was he wanting to wear this mask, or was there another reason why? And it just doesn't sound as brutal as the iron mask. So I kind of lose my intensity about, okay, well then who was this person if he wasn't being severely punished in an iron mask? So he was brought under the care of this Saint Mars, who was kind of in charge of a number of prisons. And it says here that the prisoner had been moved around a little bit, and that his name was misspelled on his death. It wasn't actually Martial, it was Marcioli, which sounds a little bit more Italian. And one of the prisons that he had been transferred from was actually formerly France. Now it's in Italy, so there's like this kind of Italian flavor to it. And, is in Pignerol, which is where the French-Italian link comes in. And then it says he died in 1694. But as they go down the path, they find out that it could have been this person named Eustache Dauger de Cavoy. I think I said that right. And he'd been born into a prominent family. His father was in the Musketeers, and his mother, and they actually served royalty in France. So as we go down, we start seeing there was more secrecy surrounding this. He was carrying some kind of secret, and even to the effect that this was a massive scandal involving not only the widespread sale of poisons, but also, so he was involved in scandalous activity, but also devil worship ceremonies and infant sacrifices that involved King Louis XIV's own mistress. And so this caused them to draw a veil of secrecy over the testimony and prosecution of those involved. And apparently there's proven evidence of this. And again, it just says he died. So we have this perception now that this person lived in a mask, they were highly secretive, and they died. This is the jailer. This is Saint Mars, the jailer of these different prisons, and particularly over the man in the iron mask. And it just goes through and tells us a little bit more. So he was the prisoner was isolated. It could have been this guy here, so Nicholas Fouquet. He was isolated in his own special cell, but basically the instructions were that it couldn't be in view of anyone passing by. It was behind a number of locked doors so that no guards could hear him speak. Saint Mars was to personally attend this prisoner's physical needs and to advise the prisoner that if he were ever to speak of anything other than his basic needs, he would be killed. And so he was considered a dangerous political prisoner. And then they continue to talk about this potentially, you know, the other aspects of this prisoner's imprisonment and what potentially the secrets were, and dangerous secrets. So we get this feeling of danger, and we get this feeling of still the mystery is hanging over this person. Like, what did they know? What had they seen? Who were they being held by? And what was the, you know, why the pain of death if somebody spoke to them? And so we just keep going through some more of this evidence here. And so then why the mask? Why did his face have to be masked? You know, these sorts of things. Would people recognize him? Would his real name and true identity be revealed by the appearance of his face? And so something that I found interesting in this piece here is that Charles II of England and King Louis XIV were closely related, and however, they represented two different factions of so-called Christianity. There was the Protestant, and then there was the Roman Catholic. So Protestant would have been your English, and then the Roman Catholic would have been the French. And so they were kind of secretly working on negotiations, and it is believed that these were done in secret, and because there would be no reconciliation between Protestant and Catholic, so this kind of friction was there that couldn't be openly addressed. So there were these secret Treaty of Dover, and so there was outcomes of that. But here again, so when we talk about the insurrection story and this kind of revolutionary campaign to whip up the masses against the old regime and to truly be done with feudalism and the church and all of that, that was keeping the people's freedom, which would be a humanist kind of freedom, not freedom in Christ, but a humanist freedom, in chains. And so, you know, this replay in our current day of this so-called liberty movement has some of the same hallmarks. So we see here there was this charge of they were torturing somebody in the Bastille, and so, you know, you can imagine people thinking, we have to get that place taken down because, oh my goodness, all these bad things are happening there. And then accused of plotting the assassination. So you've got this talk about assassination, all this drama. even though they say there's no evidence of this. And then they trotted out what it says here, an old rape charge that they may have been trumped up and sentenced him by death by the Catherine wheel. So this real threat of like someone being charged for this thing, and these torture stories, and the Bastille being really the image of the thing that the people have to tear down and take down because it's so awful. And then just as we go through, so the whole thing remains a mystery. And we have this image of this man in this prison being waited on behind several closed doors. He has his own personal guard, and he can't talk to anybody, and he's just in there chained up, and he's wearing this iron mask. So the questions remain. Who is this person, and was he fictional? Was he real? Why was his mask actually velvet? What was the deal with that? Why was he being portrayed as a victim? Why was he locked up? And why would he have a velvet mask on? And here's another depiction of what that might look like. Another story that emerges at the time, and I think it was in that last article, no, it wasn't in the last article, but what reminded me in the last article was that one of the prisons that the man in the iron mask was put into was actually on an island. I think it was called St. Anne's Island or something, St. Margaret's Island. And it just reminded me of another story at the time, which was of a unfair imprisonment of a man when he was young, and then he got very old. So he's in there for a long, long, long time, right? And he started digging his way out, and that is the Count of Monte Cristo. Well, I never really thought about it before, but the Count of Mount Cristo, Mount Christ, the Count of Mount Christ. So right there you have this this like biblical theme, even in the story of the Count of Monte Cristo. And then you have this imprisonment and this victim and this unfair treatment, and he's just been hidden away for all these years, and he's going to dig his way out. And when I think about the alignment of the end of the millennial reign, the releasing of Satan or the loosing of Satan, I wonder if there's a correlation between the imagery of, okay, so now we're done with the millennial reign, that's over. All those people have been chased off or they left. And now we have this prisoner crawling out of a dungeon. Do you see where I'm going with that? So I think that really piqued my interest. Also, the ruling monarch at the time was King Louis XIV, and he was actually called the Sun King. It tells us, the history books tell us that he was part of the nobility that were beheaded as part of the revolution. In my mind, he's actually probably someone that brought in or returned the idea of sun worship, if he truly is part of the sun worshipping occult corrupted monarchy. Maybe that was right after the millennial reign that took over. It's possible. And another person I really want to talk about is Voltaire. So Voltaire, actually, his name was not Voltaire. His birth name was Francois-Marie Arouet, and he was famous for his criticism of Christianity and of slavery, and he was advocate of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and separation of church and state, which all sounds amazing except for his criticism of Christianity. But as I've spoken about before, when you see the chains broken throughout the imagery, the symbolism of the French Revolution and the American Revolution, you start to realize that, and you read what they were writing at the time, just like Voltaire was writing, you realize that the chains that they perceived to be around them, to be imprisoning them or making them slaves was the laws of God. Okay, so they perceived the church, the laws of God, and the way that the church had kept that going, to them felt like bondage. They felt like they were slaves, like they were in a prison. Okay. And we see that even with modern alchemist, dualist, secret society, occult teaching, is that they believe God has them in a prison. And the opposite of that to them is that human will should actually be the description of freedom. Okay, so if a human wants to do something, just as Aleister Crowley said, do as thou wilt. That is their law. That is what they believe to be true, and that God denying them that is actually slavery. So when they talk about things like, them being slaves or them being unfree, and that the feudal system in the church was actually keeping them bound, there was an unbridled sense of human liberty that was starting to rise after the millennial reign, after the medieval ages. And when they decided to decapitate the church, they introduced these themes that are really pagan and heathen. And with that came worship of the earth, worship of the sun, and all of these other, and much more licentiousness, which we covered in a couple of the other videos as well. So just to introduce you to Voltaire, who this article talks about in a little more detail. Let us genially acknowledge that he played a great part in dispelling the last mists of the Middle Ages. Okay, so his was a part to play in the introduction of the New World Order. Okay, the order that was going to come in after Christ left, after the saints left. I don't say leave like totally, but they were no longer visible here in the flesh. Okay, so after that sort of millennial reign was done, the 1,000 years was over, we had people like Voltaire, and I want to talk about his name for a minute. I just find it really weird that he changed his name to, apparently in the Bastille, he changed his name to Voltaire. Well, what does Voltaire, if you just split it in two, it's volt, air. Like electricity in the air. Like if you know anything about the ether, and you know that Satan is the prince of the power of the air, the electrical energy in the air. I just find it really, I think it just links up with the idea that Satan was alive and well, and that Voltaire actually knew all about the plan to what they would consider Lucifer being the liberator of humanity. And this is where that humanism comes into it, is they really do believe that Satan is their hero. Lucifer is the one who is the liberator of humanity from this kind of God prison that they live in. Okay, so that's why they shoot rockets into the firmament. That's why they're trying to do, Babel 2.0, is because they think they are going to defeat God, the creator of all these things. It's ridiculous and it's insane, but that's what they believe. So Voltaire, the physicist who drove the old Cartesianism out of France and imposed on it the fertile principles of Newton, who was also a high-level Freemason. Voltaire, the social reformer who talked to 18th century kings of the rights of man and scourged every judicial criminal of his aristocratic age. Voltaire, the cosmopolitan who boldly set up England's ensign of liberty in feudal France. All these things were done by the flippant Voltaire of the flippant modern preacher. And so he was one of those who won for us. This is a Liberty magazine, by the way, that I'm reading from, so it's not for us, but it's for the people who believe in this false liberty. He was one of those who won for us that liberty to think rationally and to speak freely on religious matters, which we too early attribute to our new goddess, evolution. And so the position of Voltaire in the development of religious thought in Europe is unique. So at his time, he was considered to be a leader of revolutionary thought. You find yourself in the first half of the 19th century when, in all those countries, a few hundred men and some women maintained a superb struggle with restored monarchs and restored Jesuits for the liberty that had been wrested from them, and you find that the vast majority of them were disciples of Voltaire. It was an anti-clerical movement, and intellectual and emotional electricity which gathering insensibly in the atmosphere of Europe in the second half of the 18th century. It burst at last in the lurid flashes and the rolling thunders of the Great Revolution. On the religious side, which this writer is concerned with, the devastating form was overwhelmingly due to the writings of Voltaire. And then Rousseau was also involved. To ignore Voltaire is to ignore history. So this man was critical to the revolutionary movement, the philosophies that underpinned it, and the way that people were being truly, severed from their relationship to God and to the church. And they were forming a new cult of humanism, okay? And so in the great college of the Jesuits, he learned to articulate his skepticism of the church, the kindly, and then there was an abbot, probably a Jesuit. So he helped guide his fortunes by introducing him to some of the most brilliant and dissolute circles in Paris. And it was a club of abbés, nobles, writers, blah, blah, blah. And we know what these secret societies are now. He would rapidly attain that large and peculiar knowledge of the Old Testament, appears in his writings, that he was put in the Bastille for naughty epigrams. He in the pensive solitude of the Bastille, he changed his name to Voltaire. So, and he was, obviously an admirer of Isaac Newton. He was banished from his country for smiling at Adam and Eve. You see? So this is like the rebellion of man without God, thinking in its pride, in the pride of the heart, in the darkness, that dark pride of the heart, that you can have freedom and liberty without God. You're smiling at Adam and Eve for sinning, Even those illiterate days, some of his publications sold 300,000 copies, which would have been a lot. So the last 20 years of his life belonged to the anti-Christian works, and he basically had grave humanitarian purpose. And humanitarian, we've been really programmed to think of that as a good thing. It really isn't. It is putting yourself on the throne of your heart, not God, which is death. It's spiritual death. And this is what these revolutions were all about. His knowledge was defective and inaccurate because all knowledge was defective and inaccurate in the 18th century, when research was only just beginning to recover from its long ecclesiastical paralysis. So again, just this kind of really reviling the church, really having that resentful, spiteful feeling toward the church is what we're reading here. And this is what these people, this is what fuels their atheism. Voltaire and Rousseau and the French Revolution they brought about, he was amazed to hear that they believed in God. See, here's where it gets confusing. As firmly and as much more reasonably than he and his colleagues did. Well, guess what? It's not the same God as ours. Clearly, they don't like the Bible. They don't like what it's telling us. They don't want to follow the rules. They want man to be on the throne. So they don't believe in the same God that we do. And this is the big trick that the church has been deceived by. This is one of the huge masks that the modern church is just still deceived by, is that these people of history are somehow Christians, and they will come out and say that. They'll say, oh, Isaac Newton was a Christian. He believed in God. No, he really didn't believe in the same God as we do. He wasn't a Christian. Okay, but this is part of the huge deception that came out after that time. The taste of the 18th century, still fouled by the Middle Ages, is not the taste of the 20th. So here we go. Like they see the Middle Ages as being foul. These people were not Christians. The Middle Ages was ruled by the church and Christ for 1,000 years. The doctrines attacked here by Voltaire are wholly discredited, yet they are still the official teachings of the churches, except Congregationalists. They are largely enforced on innocent children. So they're talking about the Bible here. And this person is saying basically these doctrines of the Bible that were attacked by Voltaire and were discredited are still being taught to people. Innocent children are being taught the Bible. This is how these people believe. You know, they hate the Bible. And they literally, and then he says here, they literally accept, they are accepted by millions of our people. I see no reason to refrain from letting the irony of Voltaire fall on them. Okay, so they think they have some victory through this philosophy of humanism, and it is the biggest lie. It is the lie that goes back to the Garden of Eden, that ye can be like gods, and it is a lie. The reader must, however, conclude at once that the following pages are so many red-hot charges into the tottering ranks of medieval dogmas. Okay, so they continually hate on this. And we have some writings here regarding the Old Testament, the New Testament, the book of Romans. And I found this part interesting because I think this date needs to be investigated a little bit more. I probably have it in my notes, but in the year 1755, Voltaire had heard that the earthquake had destroyed between, and this is in Portugal, 30,000 to 40,000 people. And it was one of the chief festivals of the Catholic year, the Feast of All Saints. And the crowded churches were in the very act of worshiping when the ground shook. And in a few minutes, 16,000 men, women, and children were slain, and as many more perished in the subsequent fires and horrors. Okay, so I'm just throwing that in there as an event that could have been pivotal to the end of the millennial reign. Just putting that out there for anyone who wants to go investigate that. I'm going to look at it in more detail because that's very interesting. Voltaire did not believe in the spirituality or immortality of the soul, but he had unshakable conviction of the existence of, I'm going to put this in air quotes, God. Because again, we've just proven that he did not believe in our God. He did not believe in the true God. His unwavering dogma does not waver for an instant that the world was designed by a supreme intelligence and is moved by the supreme power. So the elite secret societies do believe in God. This is the thing. They believe that God, the creator, is the enemy, and that he has created this prison of, this beautiful earth, this amazing environment which holds, and he holds all things together. He's provided everything we need, and they feel this is a prison because they have to obey his laws if they live in his kingdom. We saw in the second part of this series that, and we just see all the symbolism here. So the Liberty Angel, the broken chains, what they believe, to be the church and the laws of God. And then we also saw this kind of a vine, which are they unshackling a snake? The Ouroboros in the middle, the Liberty cap on the spear, the fasces spear, and then the triangle with the eye in the middle and this scepter here. So the rights of man became the law of the revolution, post-revolution, of the new democracy, of the new world. A human will, okay? The human will, the human desire becomes the law. Not God. Our desires become the new law. And in here it is actually written, in the presence of the Supreme Being, which I just have to highlight because we talked about that as well. And just going back to this guy really quickly. This jailer, who actually presided over the Bastille and the prisoner in the Iron Mask. His name was Saint Mars. And I want to show you that there is a connection here because Mars is the god of war. And the prisoner's name was actually Marcioli. Here. So Marcioli or Martial. The root of those words is March, Mars. And when we go back to part 1 of this series, I went through how they had started the cult of the Supreme Being, and they would hold the festival of the Supreme Being on the Champ de Mars in Paris. So it's called the Field of March, I think it is. And this is the Supreme Being that they were worshiping. Okay, so this was the cult, and I even highlighted that there was a figure here in the shadows at the back that looks like Satan. But the angel of light, disguised as an angel of light. This light here shows me that these people were being deceived by the false light. And we've seen that in a few ways. So I want to look a little bit more at the mask and this idea of the mask. So we have the prisoner in the Iron Mask, the man in the Iron Mask in the Bastille, sometimes depicted in older movies like this. And we've seen this picture. You know, this person is seen as a victim who's been locked up for many, many years. We have other depictions in media, such as the mask with Jim Carrey, and this is actually the mask of Loki. And if anyone knows Loki, I understand Loki to be, and I haven't done too much research on that, but another depiction of the enemy, Satan. And as we know, Jim Carrey gets taken over, well, his character gets taken over by the mask, and he becomes a whole other person, so transformed, you see, by the mask that goes on his face. He is transformed into something else. Another famous mask is the one from Silence of the Lambs. Very creepy mask, but again, this person being very dangerous but highly intelligent, held in a very high maximum state prison, and people aren't really allowed to speak to this person, and when they do, they end up becoming almost endangered just by speaking to them. Celebrities sporting masks, especially during the time between 2020 and 2022, we saw a lot of masks. We see masks. This looks like the Whore of Babylon. I think this is Madonna wearing a very fancy mask. Here's a more recent mask that was seen on Doja Cat as she went to one of her birthday parties, 33, I think it might have been. Obviously an initiation ceremony into a high-level occult society. And celebrities really do partake in a lot of this mask wearing, and it's almost as if they're paying homage to somebody or something. Here are the Rothschilds. They famously used to hold masquerade parties back in the day. Maybe they still do. And what the mask tells me is that they are celebrating a disguise. They're celebrating portraying themselves as something that they're not. And this is almost a ritual, okay? So the ritual of, you can even see duality on that mask there, but just the ritual of portraying oneself as something that they're not. And just going back to the verse that said, we know that the devil comes disguised or masquerading as an angel of light. And so this disguise is highly celebrated in the classes of people that are ruling society. And why would they be doing this? Where does this disguise come from? You know, we see eyes wide shut, the masks that were used in the rituals there. We see masks being portrayed as kind of almost a part of a deeper meaning, if you will. So another evidence, I think, just as I was talking about, you know, the deception of transformation into something that you're not. You know, Satan comes to us as an angel of light. Well, he's actually the enemy of our souls. He is actually our worst enemy dressed up in something that we would be impressed by, something that will coerce us or convince us of the opposite. And just interestingly, you know, the Transformers series has this kind of Decepticon theme going on as well. And we know that the Transformers are these vehicles that transform into robots that can move and fight and be sentient in a way. And they are all led by Megatron. So these Decepticons, you know, they kind of are depicted by these masks because they transform from one thing to another. And it's kind of like the more robotic version of that. But we also have heroes who are depicted wearing masks. So we have the Lone Ranger. And why would the Lone Ranger be a hero but also wearing a mask? Why does a hero have to mask themselves? We know that Lucifer does believe himself to be the liberator of humanity, and many people buy into that lie. So there's that. And Batman, another type of hero that, you know, I think some people have actually done the work to show that in more ways than one, that's actually a depiction of the devil. And even Robin, his sidekick, is also wearing a mask. They couldn't look more evil to me, actually. Iron Man mask. And so kind of going back to the Iron Mask theory with the Iron Man, and obviously Spider-Man, who wears a mask when he does so-called good things. And some others have been suspected of wearing masks as well. And so this deception of the mask is becoming more and more celebrated and almost normalized in our society. And there's been stories as well of people showing up on TV shows who actually design masks for particular famous people so that they can slip through unnoticed. It was really interesting as I was listening to a video the other day or the other night. I'm on the West Coast, and earlier that day I had actually been typing some research, and I typed in Bastille, Satan, because I had this feeling that the Bastille was a representation of the abyss, and that this masked prisoner was a representation of Satan. Okay, because we don't know if that story is even true. When they stormed the Bastille, there was nobody in there, so it was just kind of it was like a representation so that people had something to fight for, and they wanted to release this unknown prisoner or these unknown prisoners because they had been led along this understanding that these people were victims, you see. So victims of the old regime, victims of, you know, the church, and victims of the old nobility who would have been serving Christ actually during the millennial reign. So there's kind of this thought in my mind that, does the Bastille actually depict the abyss? And does that prisoner who'd been in there, I don't even know how many years, would that represent the 1,000 years that Satan had been captive? Well, lo and behold, this came up, and I've never heard of this before. But it was before I listened to another video on YouTube of some other people that are also following the millennial reign, the little season, and they had received an email about this Victor Hugo, and I have not actually, until earlier that same day, I had never really thought about Victor Hugo. So it was very coincidental that it all happened on the same day. But I came across this because I typed in Satan Bastille. And so it turns out that Victor Hugo wrote about Satan. And you're not going to believe this. He actually wrote about Satan, his imprisonment, and more. He wrote about Jesus and about a lot of other things within the same works, like the same written works. And this is all in French, but you know, so you can actually go and find this in French, but I was able to open it in a browser and translate it. This is a very long text, and I will put a link to it in the description, but you can see that it talks about, I've read quite a lot of it, and I had a bunch of it highlighted, but the highlights disappeared, so I don't have time for that. But this actually talks a lot about the imprisonment of Satan in the abyss. And it also talks about him being released. So Victor Hugo is a very interesting person that I don't know a lot about, to be honest. I know that he had a huge funeral ceremony that actually put him in a massive casket and marched him through the Triumphal Arch. So Satan turns to Jehovah, weary of the abyss. Oh, the only murderer, the only victim, it is me. I have for torment the evil. And he's kind of like bemoaning his captivity in the abyss. And again, I'll link this in so you can read through it. And he's kind of like begging for mercy and all of this kind of thing. And then we go down here, and there's a section at the bottom. I'm just going to roll down a little bit more. The angel of liberty. Okay, so the angel of liberty hovers in the spacious azure. It seems as if his eye is looking for a way out to the heavens. He sees a star. And so we keep going through here under the vault, the fatal vault. And then it goes, I cannot, replies the star, and liberty continues. At least tell me the road and how to get off of it. Speak to the lightning. And, you know, so this liberty theme is now coming into this story of the actual release of Satan. And as you go down here, you'll start to see you know, the gloomy unity of tomb and chaos, which is called hell. And he actually describes the abyss as being in hell. So that's one thing I wanted to mention with this. I'm just trying to find the part here. So here we go. Hang on. So Lilith, this Isis Lilith creature is down there as well. And it seems to me that when I was reading it, she is an actual being, and she was overlooking or overseeing his, where he was being bound. And then what happens is this angel comes down, and I think this is where we talk about the angel of liberty. So we're, and comes down into the abyss, and actually goes down and starts to speak to Satan to wake him up. And so she's having this kind of dialogue with Lilith. And anyway, at the very end, you know, it kind of goes through this whole thing. It's a very long document, and they're talking. There's a lot of talking and a lot of speaking to Satan. And it says here, but Satan, in the end, you must be pitied. You must need to see someone crying. I come to you. So this person, or not this person, this angel of liberty is coming down to remove at least the weight of the earthly chain to heal the dark human wound at your side, calls him Father and all this stuff, and talks about Cain and Abel, and so it's just very interesting that this was written. But at the end, so the angel looked at him with his hands joined. At last a light, which a seraphim could have thrown, issued from that great brow, all burned by fevers. With more difficulty than two rocks, his lips parted, a stormy breath raised his terrible side, and the angel heard the word, go. Okay, so this abyss, this last part here, kind of is the final picture of this angel going down into the abyss and actually waking or rousing out of imprisonment Satan. Okay, and this is written by Victor Hugo. Sorry, the prison, and this is another piece of the work, and it's actually called, part of this is actually called The Storming of the Bastille. Okay, like I don't, and in Wikipedia it says there wasn't much written under this heading, so we don't have a lot here, but I do wonder what the total would have looked like, or if it is somewhere and it's just been disposed of. But Satan's sob in the shadow continues, Satan under his vault. And then further down, an angel is between us, what she has done counts you, man chained by you, but is delivered. O Satan, you can now say, I will live. Come, the destroyed prison abolishes hell. Come, the angel liberty is your daughter and mine. And then at the bottom, Satan is dead, reborn, O heavenly Lucifer. So this whole set of writings is incredible find. I hope we can all look at it a little bit more. Obviously, Victor Hugo was not, I don't think he was actually writing on behalf of Christianity. But one interesting thing is that here is something called Decapitating God, and this was written by Victor Hugo. And his experiences of seances in exile is closely bound up with his protest at the Second Empire. I think this means the empire following the medieval empire. It compares a particularly ambivalent image of revolution as a decapitation of God. Okay? And that's why prior I mentioned that the revolutions really were a decapitation of God. They were there, the whole premise of the revolution was to take God off the throne of France, but then we had Napoleon, who became king of Rome, and he became all of these other, and he did all of the emancipation work, if you get me, and he released legally, by public consent, so by these revolutions, not he specifically, but the revolutionary work that was done by a number of individuals was to take God off the throne. Rome was reinstated and the church corrupted, and the humanist endeavor of the revolutionary movements, the philosophies that drove the French Revolution, became the underpinning of the society that we live in now, which is all about the liberty of the human spirit, the Aleister Crowley, do what thou wilt, you are your own God, you don't answer to anyone else. These philosophies are what rule our society now, and they are not in alignment with the kingdom of Christ. If we are citizens of heaven, we are not aligned with this world. That's why Jesus said, be not of this world. We were called to come out of this world. We are called to be citizens of the kingdom of heaven, and we are the camp of the saints. We are the ones that will inherit the kingdom, but we cannot be aligned with this world. And that's just something that, as we go into this next, what I feel has been a building revolution, we have to be aligned with the principles of Christ and reject the humanist creeds of the world that would say your liberty, your freedom, your personal will is freedom, because it's not. Christ set us free from sin. We're not here to do as we will. This is my understanding of the scriptures, is that we are servants of the kingdom. When we come through the baptism of the Holy Spirit, we come into the kingdom of Christ. He is our king, and God is sits on the throne of our heart. And truly, it's so much better than what we can do for ourselves. Our hearts are full of wickedness. We do not, our hearts are full of sin. We are of flesh. We are not yet in our heavenly form, and therefore we struggle with the flesh. And so how can our will be freedom? It can only be captivity to sin. So I guess the premise out of all of this, and the masquerade, and all of these masks that the deceiver wears, his minion wears masks. We saw the masquerades of the elites who celebrate and ritualize the wearing of masks because they live in deception. They live to deceive. That is their whole purpose. They work for the deceiver. Jesus said, "You are of your father, the devil, who was a liar from the beginning." You understand? So these people are aligned with their father, the devil. They always have been, and we are not the same. We are not of this world. If we are in Christ, we are new creatures. We don't, and that, I think that was another paradox of the whole 2020 to 22 time frame, where people were forced to put something over their face, and that is not something that God ever depicts anywhere. We are to be in the image of God, to stand here unashamed of his presence in our lives, and to be representatives of him and his kingdom and the truth. So the masked prisoner, was that Satan? Was the Bastille actually a representation of the abyss? And very interesting that Victor Hugo actually put those together under a whole writing that he did. So I find it very plausible. I find whether that's just the method of revelation that he and his societies were involved in, or whether he was truly trying to tell us something for our own good, I don't know. But either way, I think it's very, very interesting that the prisoner of the Bastille wore a velvet mask, was in there for a long time. Nobody knows who he was or what he was doing. Voltaire, the other philosopher, visited the Bastille, and so you can just imagine what may have been actually going on in the Bastille. And then this whole liberty movement exploded. This whole independence from God movement was formed, and the revolutions to, get the public to consent to their own rejection of God. So that's where I'll leave it today. I thank you so much for this, for taking the time to listen to this. I think I've hopefully hit on some interesting points, and take care. I'll talk to you next time.